THA Talks, for free thought and open minds.
And for freedom of speech.
Hello, I'm Paul Obitelli and welcome to another edition of THA Talks, the alternative podcast show from the UK. Our talks include news, conspiracy, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion and much more. If you'd like to check out our full archive, just go to www.thatalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. And if there's anyone who'd like to contact us and give us some feedback, or maybe you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, you can email us info@thatalks.com. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show via our RSS feed, and you can also find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, and many other podcast directories out there. Well, hello everyone. Thanks for tuning in these crazy times. The last show we done with John White, we addressed the virus, the coronavirus that had been spread out around the UK and Europe and across the world, and the dangers of that virus and how to treat it. And on that show, we took very seriously the extent of the virus and what to do to avoid it, and obviously how serious it can get if you get it, and what type of people are most vulnerable to it. I'm going to be speaking with one and only David Parry today, just about this lockdown, about what he thinks about that, and obviously we'll be touching on the virus as well. What else is there to talk about now? And particularly because we've got a lot more time to do it, I'm going to start rolling out a few more shows to make use of this time, and I'm sure you guys will appreciate an extra thing to listen to while you're chilling, doing whatever you're doing, waiting for this chaos to pass us by. So for now, we're welcoming back to the show, it's been a while, Reverend David Parry. How you doing, David?
Afternoon, Cock. Yes, I'm doing quite well. How's yourself?
It's how are we doing? I mean, I've got more time on my hands, and you know, I mean, it's very, very strange times, but it's good to have you back on. I mean, before we touch on the obvious, you've actually been quite busy as well with, was it the POO? The PEW?
Beg your pardon?
Isn't that the name? You've been busy with a new YouTube show? Isn't it called the PEW?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm very, very deeply honoured. Leo Zagami, who we both know as a friend, of course, who is he numero uno conspiracy theorist these days? I don't know. I mean, he's a phenomenon.
Yeah.
A prolific author, a practicing and very proud Freemason, of course.
Yeah.
He claims to be in the good side of the Illuminati. You know me, Paul. I never know what I make of those things. And of course, a prolific and seasoned YouTuber. He contacted, can you believe, Roseanne Barr?
Yeah, you know, that's quite a name, especially recently with a lot of the controversy. She's been attacked by the PC mob, so she must be saying something right.
I think she's gorgeous, and you know, no one expected. Forgive me, Roseanne, if you ever listen to this. No one expected this mine of information. You know, she's a real intellectual. She's funny. She's clever. She knows her stuff. And so, of course, and we're on her channel. I mean, we're on Leo's YouTube channel. We're on her YouTube channel. So the figures are quite phenomenal.
Right.
And I've made two new friends. He says he's not a rabbi, but I've heard people who say he is. Lowell Joseph Gallin, who's become a good chum of mine, ferocious supporter of Trump, goes around talking about patriots. I don't know what I think of that. You know me, Paul. You know, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying I don't know. I don't know what to think of that. And a real American gentleman, John Barnwell, who used to own the biggest bookshop in the world, a cult bookshop, and you know, again, a mine of esoteric information. So we hold a weekly 2-hour session. It's quite a mammoth turn. I mean, people can phone in, they can ask questions. Leo, for some reason, I suppose he's scared of my old laptop exploding, doesn't let me see the comments, and it probably is something technical. I don't think there's anything else. But, you know, we're causing quite a a stir, and I notice we're being advertised and discussed as the most eccentric panel on YouTube. I don't know what that means. But I mean, Roseanne, I can't believe after those shows, what was it in the 90s, Paul? Can you remember that?
It was just called Roseanne. I think I remember my mum used to love that when I was younger. I always remember my mum watching that all the time and watching it with her. It got huge at one stage. That was for a comedy, it's quite uncommon for comedies to get that big, but it was, at least in this country anyway. But I remember it was huge, Roseanne. For a while.
It was global. It was global.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the point was they were doing, I mean, that was with John Goodman. I mean, he went on.
That's it.
So she became a Hollywood A-lister. He became an Hollywood A-lister, excuse me. And, I mean, I think the secret of that show was, the first show to show an ordinary American family and their ups and downs and the funny side and, the less funny side because it's family. So I can't believe I'm on a show with her. But no, she's got very strident views. She's still an activist. She's deeply into Jewish mysticism, which I'd never have guessed, forgive me, Roseanne, in 1,000 years. I'd never have guessed that. And, I think between us, we bring all sorts of new and challenging perspectives to the audience. So, yes, I've been very, very busy with that. And, of course, pastors are actually key workers.
Yeah.
So since we got licensed, I mean, our little Valentinian group was licensed by the Metropolitan Community Church. I mean, the only church with enough vision and guts to see that we were necessary, that, we needed support.
Yeah.
So we've been trying to set that up. And we got the weekly drop-in centres. We've got the monthly meditation circle, which will need, all of it needs revamping now. And, I've been rushed off my little toddlers, my little trotters recently. But I know you've been a busy bunny too.
Well, yeah, that's it. I've been neglecting the show for a while, but the listeners understand that my ways. I'll be back and forth to it. I will crack on with it. Especially, I've got no excuse now because of this break I've got going. But we've all got to pay our bills and bits and pieces, and this is a free project, so it has been a bit stale. I wouldn't say stale because that's unfair to the guest that's been on, but slow recently. So, but I have got a lot of guests lined up. It's just I don't just want to sort of do it for the sake of doing it. I want to sort of get back into putting my brain into the subject so I can sit down with people and have a proper chat about stuff. So, but yeah, I've apologised for a few shows now to any listeners that haven't been getting as much regular content on here, but I'm keeping it ticking over, and I will be pushing more stuff out there as well. So, I mean, I think nowadays it's going to be difficult not to because there's going to be so much to talk about, which brings us to the hot topic, which I'm sure no one doesn't need an introduction. This virus and this lockdown, what are your views on it?
Well, I mean, obviously, we're in a medical crisis. I mean, I think you've got to be a very strong-minded person indeed to deny that's happening. I mean, something's happening.
Yeah.
And I've seen, as you have on the internet, people saying the whole thing's a fake. I find that extremely difficult to believe because I know some people who contracted coronavirus.
Well, the thing is, I mean, we've already covered the show, and I'd like to say before I say anything controversial about this, I think as you've just pointed out, when you're in a position where there's so much chaos like this, and obviously something very serious going on, it's best just to knuckle down and do what's safe, like washing your hands, being extra hygienic. The lockdown is the government has advised it, so be lawful and do what we're advised and see this through legally and all that. That said, increasingly I'm starting to look at this and see something very, very fishy. And as I said, I'm not going to put my loved ones that are elderly and more vulnerable to this virus in danger and just ignore it. I'm continuing to wash my hands and do all this. So I'm not encouraging people just to suddenly, throw all that out the window. But we're looking at our freedoms imposed upon very, very much here. So we have got a right to scrutinise what's going on. And I just think with the lack of testing that's going on, and if you combine that with a lot of cases where people are being recorded as dying with coronavirus as opposed to dying of coronavirus, and then if you add that to coronavirus being the virus of which you contract a disease from called COVID-19. And there's just so much vague bits and pieces connecting all this. There's too much to be completely convinced that it's 100% genuine. And so my view is, at the moment, I'm going to see this through. We'll see it through. But when we're at the end of it, boy, am I going to scrutinise this. And if there's any leftovers from this restrictions and imposing on our freedoms, I advise people to crack down and fight it big time. But that's a summary of where I think at the moment. So just so people know where I sit. Back to you on that.
Well, Paul, I mean, we reversed roles on this particular issue. I'm the conspiracy boy, and you're not.
Well, it's nothing wrong with that, David. Nothing wrong with
Well, I don't know. This whole thing has made me so deeply suspicious. I think it's the job of government to calm people's nerves, not whip them up into a frenzy. I can't believe, and I quite like in some ways the way Boris Johnson has handled it. I'm no friend of Boris Johnson, but I quite like in some ways what he's been doing.
Right.
That said, the government have gone out of their way to allow panic and fear to rule the media. The media have been so grossly irresponsible. It's the first time in my life that I would sanction the arrest of journalists and public whippings. You know, they're actually using phrases like post-apocalyptic. Oh, please try and calm things down. And also, it's not post-apocalyptic. You're not living in Netflix. It's not a TV movie. This is called real life, and that is called grossly irresponsible. And also, there are lots of basic liberties which are now being questioned. I mean, I think it was one of the past Lord Chief Justices, not an insignificant position in our country, who was openly criticising the police recently for being much more than overzealous. Now, in London, they've tended to take a more laid-back attitude, to my mind, which I think is appropriate to a city like this. It's big, it's unruly, there are so many different ethnicities, and everybody, to my mind, is behaving very well. They're not being lawless, they're not storming buildings. You know, the streets are much emptier than they were. I think they're behaving very well. And the police have had a quite softly attitude in London, to my knowledge. Probably now we get some listeners writing of us some horror stories or phoning of us some horror stories. But, you know, okay, but overall. But if you look outside the city, where they're racing up and down in streetcars, where somebody sets foot outside the house twice, and they're using drones for the countryside, which is why the ex-Lord Chief Justice said something, to monitor how many walks people are taking. Boris Johnson gave an instruction, in other words, heavy advice. He didn't make a law, and there is no country in the world, there never has been, to make laws about how you eat, how you exercise, and you know, intruding into your private life like that. This is, I mean, the relish, and I'm not against the police, but the relish some of the police authorities have had in being able to flex their muscles is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
And, you know, this isn't 1984. This isn't the Soviet Union, at least not yet. And, you know, we've got to say, well, hang on a second. What we're trying to do is protect our loved ones. We're not being told we live in a police state and do what you're told. Those two things are completely separate. What do you think, Paul?
Well, yeah. I think the problem is with the modern generation today is they are very, and I don't want to generalise everyone because there's some very nice young lads and lasses out there, but it seems there's a lot of apathy and they don't really recognise freedom and democracy. We've seen that a lot in this country, in the UK, and I think it's the same in America, where people almost look at democracy and free speech as something that's going out of date and is a bit stupid and naive of people. They just don't value and I think that's what maybe we're seeing now I hope we don't see it. It might work the other way around. It might wake people up and think, oh, actually, this won't be too good, is it? I quite like the freedom idea and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting time because I think on whether you're on the right or the left, I think there's a lot of hypocrisy being exposed now by both. You know, a lot of what people are used to, and it's making a lot of people wake up and look a bit more and question what's going on in society. So whatever the truth may be, I think that is a positive we can look at. But I would like to mention as well, when we're talking about this lockdown and everything, and this is what we've got to do, this is the serious thing. Unless I'm mistaken, I'm pretty sure I've read this and I've heard it by people on the radio talking about it, and that's that Sweden and Japan, I believe, are not in lockdown. They're opting for that controversial herd immunity thing that Boris was attacked for at first for even mentioning. But interestingly, if that's what they are doing, looking at their numbers, I think the total cases in Sweden is 373. In Japan, it's 69. Japan's obviously got a lot less cases, but we're not seeing it go, crazy in these countries that are not doing a lockdown and are just relying on, basically, obviously they're being very careful, but they're relying on this to build up immunity, for us all to build up a collectively. So some countries are doing that. So I don't know. I guess what we've got to ask ourselves is, I think we can all agree there's some kind of virus going around, and it's obviously unpleasant and it has some very horrible effects on a lot of people out there. But is this also being used? People might think it's being created for, but is it at least possibly being used to create a totalitarian state?
Well, I mean, Paul, Leo's convinced it's a bioweapon used by the Chinese. I don't know. Bill Gates is using it to show his support of $1 billion contract with total surveillance on the level of satellites. What's that got to do with this? So you're seeing some very, very strange things crawling out the woodwork. I mean, before I get to my comment about those countries, young Londoners need to get their head out their arses, said with no respect, by the way. The way they used to go on. I mean, so we're all doing what we used to do in the old days, then, like wash our hands and be a bit more respectful to people, not to sneeze in people's faces on the tube. You've seen that as much as I have.
Yeah.
What do you think will happen if you keep doing that? But let's get to, right, this is where you cut me off the programme, we never speak again. I'm sorry, I don't think Britain is best at everything. What you're looking at in the case of Sweden, certainly, and Singapore, is very sophisticated and advanced countries who have a completely different attitude to not only their health systems, which they've invested in heavily, but also what contains a virus. I mean, certainly my friends in Singapore were telling me there are people testing on every street corner. They can tell you instantly, more or less, what's happening to you, what the best method forward is, and they've kept everything open, so their economy is booming with these sensible medical measures. And of course, this is where you hate me, Paul. Sweden, which is Scandinavia, let's not limit it just to Sweden or Denmark, has this incredibly advanced attitude compared to Britain in things like health and healthcare and what it means to be a responsible citizen. Something we've nearly forgotten in this country, that not just doing whatever you want to do at the weekend and getting pissed, and why not? There's nothing wrong with that. But by the way, what about being a good social communitarian? What about having some self-respect and respect for the people around you? All that's gone. And, you're not looking at that uniformly. So I think the northern countries not only have economic advantages in some ways over us, which we can discuss, but they've got social and cultural advantages, which at times like this are manifest and clear. Do I love Britain? Well, I love the culture, I love the history, I love the countryside. Do I respect its political system? I'm not going to hide it, because Paul, I don't.
Oh, we're
of one mind on that.
Yeah. I mean, the establishment, and not just in Britain, in Western Europe and America, for many years, people haven't had a government that represents the people anyway, and that's regardless of left or right. With mass globalization, mass open borders, anyone that objects to that is called practically a terrorist or a mass murdering Nazi. So that's been beaten down, and I think generally a lot of people in these countries no longer feel the country's theirs anymore anyway. So they have this apathy that they think, well, why should I care about this country? It's not mine anyway. I'm not responsible for it, and that's it. That's why there's so much apathy in the West, and I think we're seeing that now in Scandinavia. Although it's pretty much going the same route, it's going down that route. I think it hasn't been going down that route for as long. So it's still very, its culture and the way of life is still, I mean, at least the places I've visited down there, it's felt like that. It's felt different when I visit them. I'm actually quite envious of that side of it. But
you've hit the magic word there, culture. And, I'm a culture worker. That's the other side of what I do. British culture, and we agree on this strangely, has been under attack now for so long. It's tantamount to a crime to be proud of anything here. And that is simply not the case in Scandinavian countries. They're very proud of their history. They're not proud of the wrongs, but we've all done wrongs. That's not the issue. They're proud of their cultural history. They're proud of their heritage. Warts and all, and that's something Britain has lost, which is one of the main reasons I think we're in this terrible mess at the moment.
So let's touch on 5G. There's a conspiracy really going around at the moment, and even a lot of sort of well-known people in the celebrity world are not afraid to bring this up, which is quite unusual for them to do it. So it's really catching the waves now, this 5G, that it's out there causing these sort of viral effects and attacking people's health. I kind of think to myself, you've got to be really careful that these things are not a distraction, so that if you do start to attack this virus and how genuine it is, at least, whether it's a deliberate viral attack or if it's just hyped up beyond what it really is, whatever view you have on that, if you go on about this 5G stuff, it gives people kind of like, oh, you're a wacky conspiracy who thinks 5G is doing it to everyone. And that being said, I'm not saying that it's not. It might be. I've read into it, and there seems to be quite a reasonable argument to suggest it's not damaging. But I'm not going to just shout anyone down and say it's not the case, because there could be some other bits and pieces that we're not looking at that means it is dangerous. But what's your views on that?
Well, firstly, I have to say, Ikey boy, I love you, and I take back every nasty thing I've said over the last couple of years, because you're now talking about, people are talking about planetary surveillance and planetary microchipping. What's that got to do with the virus?
Yeah.
I don't know, Paul. John Barnwell on the pew, as I say, a new friend of mine, he's very learned in these things.
Okay.
I tend to brush that sort of thing off with a very large brush. He is convinced there's something to that, and there are sort of negative effects to global electrification. And certainly with these G programs, he says that they're always linked to abnormalities. I think what he means is on some sort of etheric or astral level,
right?
Which of course filters down to this one. Why do most people make the mistake of thinking if you turn up in a room and say a few words that everything changes? Because they've missed what the ancients were actually doing. Yes, they turn up in a room and they'd mumble some words, but in their minds and in their hearts, they were on the etheric level, trying to make it trickle down to this level, which they were doing consciously. And that worries me. If someone like John Barnwell is saying, 3G, 4G, 5G in particular is linked with some sort of biological outbreak. Remember, nobody's saying, the demon of coronavirus, which of course there must be. Everything in occultism entified. It becomes an entity. If there is some sort of demon of coronavirus, don't forget, it doesn't mean you'll see something with horns running up the road. It means there's some sort of negative electromagnetic field on a much higher level than this, and what it's trying to do is manifest itself on this level as a virus. If he's convinced there is something to that, I must admit I'm worried, because he's, as I say, blue blood American, very sober, very sensible, very cautious in what he says. Not like some of the guys we know, Paul, shout their mouths off the minute they get five penneth worth. And that's fun too. But if someone who's sober and sensible does it, then I think, I've got to get more acquainted with this. I mean, my own personal preference so far is bat soup. Somebody told me recently, bushmeat in China, there are still people selling it like nothing has happened. And the Chinese government, the Chinese government, somebody needs to explain to them what the word communism actually means. It may have different views on this, I don't know. But certainly in the European view of communism, it meant having some sort of collective responsibility for the community, not hiding things that embarrass the party from the community. So your country gets sick, whole cities become cut off by soldiers, and then it filters out to the rest of the world. And they're ignoring, apparently at the moment, the fact that bushmeat is still being openly sold, bat soup is still on all the menus, and hey, we don't actually care. This is ridiculous. If we're like you, I'm not a globalist in that sense. I am a globalist, but I don't believe in this type of globalization, as I've said on the show before, because it's just rich kids and irresponsible people telling us all what to do.
Yeah.
But this is certainly neither communism nor globalism in any recognizable form whatsoever. It's just digging it's ostrich theory. You bury your head in the sand and hope it goes away as soon as possible. So my own personal preference, because I can see how that works, is, all this bushmeat crossing special barriers and God alone knows what else. Leo's preference, as I say, is, like The Survivors. What was that, the 1980s series where, gripping BBC drama where a Chinese scientist actually in the program, it was a mistake during one of his experiments. You see in the opening credits, he actually dropped a test tube of something under test conditions and doesn't realize he's contracted anything. And as he's going to international medical conferences around the world, accidentally spreads the disease. And of course, nearly everybody dies. So, and I'm not a China hater. I think it's an amazing culture. It's got an incredibly long history, and there's a lot to learn from it. But maybe it's got things to learn from us too, like international responsibility.
Yeah.
And, so my view would be that, Leo's would be that. I don't know what the other two go, but I think Lowell does think it's a bioweapon. And it really doesn't matter. What matters is, on one level, what matters is our response to that. We need to marshal the forces, the underfunding in the NHS from both sides of Parliament, and the sheer chaos that's been introduced into a national treasure. And does it need updating? Yes. And is it a dinosaur? Yes. But it doesn't mean we can't work with it. It doesn't mean we can't improve it. Underfunding from every single party is one of the things responsible for this crisis. I mean, did you see when I put up the other day, Paul, on sort of deaths in March? If you compare corona, and every single coronavirus death is a tragedy. Please, nobody get me wrong. And it's absolutely terrible if an older person contracts it, one or two younger people contract it. We're not talking about that. But let's face it, AIDS, AIDS is still, and that's, of course, an infectious disease. HIV is infectious. There will be still more deaths this year than there will be for coronavirus. And there will be more deaths from ordinary flu. So the way it's being handled, no matter what its point of origin, we must start scrutinizing it. And for once, my wonderful friend, I disagree with you. We've got to start scrutinizing it now before the younger generation, which seems, I agree with that bit, they're so complacent, it's unbelievable, before the younger generation starts thinking it's a fait accompli. And oh, there we are, that's what the world is like. My great fear is, right, Conspiracy David, the new thing, the new tack on this show, Conspiracy David. Supposing, because this to me feels like a trial run. So next time then, a trial run for something, let's see how far we can go this time. So, next time, okay, we instantly go to lockdown. We're telling everybody to lockdown. That's the point of departure. Whereas at the moment, of course, it's the point of zenith. We probably won't go much further than that. So next time you go for that particular option, and then we talk turkey about how much we control your lives. And that I find terrifying. I mean, on the Pew 1984 keeps coming up. George Orwell, of course, was a socialist, but not completely against Stalinist Russia, completely against. And of course, 1984 is written against what he sees as potential abuses, real abuses in Russia at that point at some time, a lot of the time. Real abuses that can creep into that way of organizing society. To my mind, it's actually Brave New World, which was a parallel book by Aldous Huxley, another dystopian novel, which is much closer to where we are at the minute. And there's a set scene where one of the world controllers, they're all genetically bred, so you know your place in society, and everybody loves it because the world controller talks to a savage, and he says, "Look, how did we get here?" It goes back to a past problem. There were loads of anthrax bombs exploding around people. What they wanted was safety and security, and we gave it to them. That's why the world became what it is.
Mm.
And that terrifies me, because that sounds a bit like now. What do you think, Paul?
Well, yeah, there's a lot there, a lot of interesting stuff, and I would just like to say, if your colleague and maybe yourself and your colleague could come on the show, and we'll have a chat about 5G, because that's something I haven't really talked a lot about, and it sounds like we could have a really good chat. So I don't know what his availability is like, but if you can, yeah.
I'll message him this evening, Paul. I'll message him this evening.
Please do, because that could be a really interesting one to talk about. And just to backtrack to when you're talking about China with communism and stuff, I agree with your main point. Although I'd say it's nationalism, that they're a nationalist, very strong nationalist. China, they don't have open borders with anyone just flooding in, and they're not multicultural. They have their own culture, and that's the way it is. And that is what makes them very strong and unified and get things done very quickly. The communist side of it, that's where I wouldn't agree, because I think communism is where the state is pretty much distributes what it owns everything, and it distributes to you. And I don't think you have any individuality really at all in that. And you can't express anyone's genius as such unless the state gives you that freedom. It's basically freedom in the state's hands. It's not really in your own hands and stuff. Whereas nationalism doesn't generally have to be that way. Nationalism is just generally the belief that the state is our collective and what we should put ahead of us all. So that doesn't necessarily mean you don't get your freedoms. It does mean there's a limit to where your individuality can go. If it damages the state, then you're not allowed to do it. But that's most, I think, would agree, be happy to go with that, because most people are proud and like their country anyway, at least in my age group. But and then I'd say as well with the NHS and stuff. I mean, yeah, there's been a struggle in this country with the NHS, but it's not really that our NHS doesn't work. It's no coincidence that it's happened in a time where we had mass immigration, globalism and everything. And it's just the whole country has become very, very, very crowded and very strained. And I know there's arguments to both sides about economical side of it for workers. But if you enlarge the state, if you enlarge the people, then of course you've got to enlarge the economy anyway. So it's a vicious circle. You make the economy bigger because you've got more people. So if you have less people, then you don't need to make the economy bigger. So there's all these back and forth arguments, but I think that's another thing as well, is you look at how China is and how it can deal with this. And I think what a lot of people out there don't want to touch is this. We've got this big open border place in Europe, and it's just allowed this thing to spread. And as I said earlier on, I was saying, is it really as big as this? So perhaps it's not. I don't know. But I think certainly what we're seeing, and as I said earlier in the show, I'm not going to scoff at this virus and discourage people to be careful, to wash your hands and to look after your elderly in particular. But what I will say is, for me, it smells of sensationalism. I think they're counting numbers from just normal deaths. And what we've really got to look out for with this is when we get to the end of this, or at least the end of the year, and we look at all the annual heart disease deaths, cancer deaths, raspberry disease deaths, HIV, all these annual deaths that we normally have a rough average for, and then along with coronavirus deaths, let's see how consistent that is, because it just seems as if they're seizing this opportunity as some kind of banking, economic Western shuffle up, and we'll have to wait and see. And as I said, anyone that's sitting there saying I'm being irresponsible, no, I'm not, because I'm saying we don't know. We haven't got facts. We haven't got no facts, and it's too serious to take lightly. So I'm saying, do what you need to do. Treat it as a proper virus that's out there. But I'd say two things to keep on your shoulder is, one, don't get too afraid. Don't freak out and get depressed and get ill because you're so stressed. And two, just keep an open mind, and that when this lockdown and stuff is over, don't let's investigate what's really gone on here. Let's really look at this, and I think we need our wits about us.
I want the music to come to the show. I want the music to come back on the do shows together. We've got to have the music. China. Winston Churchill said something along the lines of an enigma and a puzzle or something. I can't quite remember what he said. what is China? What is China? Maybe it's not even the party that really holds power at the end of the day. Maybe it's the generals. I mean, we saw that really in Tiananmen Square when the party a couple of years back, when the party simply didn't know what to do, and the young people wanted more freedom, Western style. Now that's extremely right in that context. That's extremely difficult to know what they mean. That's a Chinese problem in China, so I don't know what they mean. And it seemed to be something along the lines of they wanted little things like corner shops and cafes and bars where you could go to, because of course that isn't in China. Whether people like it or not, that is not there. You go to work, you go home, that's it. Um, oh, if it's the generals, of course, the Chinese economic miracle has only got so long to last before it actually fractures into regionality. And don't forget, most of its history has been conflicting regions. It's not been a unified China. I'm not a China hater, and I can quite see how it can do lots of fascinating and interesting things if it does hold together. But I think the West has great difficulty actually seeing through the mists and the fog to what is actually going on there, because most of the mists and the fog are manufactured to stop the West seeing what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do know they're going around the world buying everything they can put their hands on, and America is. I mean, why did Richard Nixon go there in the first place? Because the Chinese were going around buying stuff, and he wanted them to buy American debt, which actually might not have been the best idea. And certainly, they're flexing their muscles. They're beginning to do that. China, for me, remains this fascinating, wonderful, deadly, intriguing culture, and I wish them well.
Yeah.
For me personally, I'm something along the lines of a left-leaning libertarian, by which libertarians of that type tend to mean we think the left has raised certain important issues which need to be discussed. It doesn't mean that we're crypto socialists or we're pretend communists. It simply means we think certain matters, certain topics that they've raised mean that the debate has moved on since the original since the founding fathers of America, many of which were libertarians, since the Renaissance. The debate has moved on. In what way has it moved on? Trade has moved on. Countries and the whole notion of country and the nation state, that's changed. Most of the way transactions are done nowadays would not be recognized by Adam Smith. It's as simple as that. He wouldn't know what they were talking about. And I don't mean through his ignorance. He wouldn't recognize it as capitalism. And I'm talking about capitalist countries who are doing it. He would say, well, no, the whole thing's underhand. I don't know what you're doing there. That is not honest trade. So from my perspective, let's go to the horse's mouth. At the end of Das Kapital, Karl Marx says very clearly, and they will get to such a point where the state will wither away. So even he eventually wants it to go to be replaced by this utopia of individuals. Well, what is it? I can't remember. I read it so long ago. And some guy in the morning he drives a tractor on the local farm, and in the evening he's a theatre critic. What a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful idea! It's just I don't think you'll get it through communism. I don't think you'll get it through socialism. Yeah.
I would question whether we'd get it at all. There's just too many stupid people, in my opinion.
Well, don't get me onto that over telly. It's good to have ideals. It's good to have a futurology. It's good to have future visions. But certainly I'm sceptical that route will lead there. So my own view is, yes, we need to maximise as much freedom, but of course, as we can get. But of course, with freedom comes responsibility, which is the bit that the Western powers that be have gone out of their way. I don't think they're bemoaning the loss of it. I don't think they're writhing their hands saying what's happened to sensible people, because they're going out of their way to make sure they're not there so they can impose as many restrictions as they want to. And that's why people have to start looking now, not later, not when the storm was blown over. Let's deal with all the medical emergencies. Let's deal with all the cases, but we've got to start looking now at what's going on and why it's going on. Otherwise, it will be 10 times more difficult to get back certain things when nobody's even thinking they should be on the statute book anymore.
Yeah.
What do you think, Paul?
No, I agree with that, and I would like to say, I mean, regarding China, it's a funny thing the way this is playing out, because we know that Trump shoots from the hip, and he's got people that are obsessively again. They've got this fetish where they've got to hate him and make sure everyone else hates him as well. Otherwise, they're weird. But the bottom line is, I know he's got his way of saying things. But when he comes out and says, I mean, if you listen to what China's done in the build up to this, there's huge amounts there to criticise, even up to the point where they talked about the US military doing it. Imagine if someone in the West said that, they'd be, lynched. But the thing is, so China has got a lot of to answer for in this, even in the build up for letting the virus come out, however extreme it turns out that it is, or whatever. But the thing is, when you look at extreme people in the West, like from the far right, that all these extremists that are going to start reacting and doing bad things and stuff, a lot of these nutters, what they do things is because it starts from not thinking that the government's speaking for them, and that's it. Now, a diplomatic way around this would be for Trump to be agreed. Yes, Trump, it is China's fault. It is China's fault. And you establish that and you say it's China's fault, but we're going to get through this and we'll deal with the problems of how it occurred and investigate it afterwards. In the meantime, I don't want any idiots out there to go bullying Chinese people, because there's nothing at all to do with Chinese people, good folks of China, human beings like the rest of us. And we must not blame them because they're just living their lives, and they're, of course, in the same they're just as vulnerable to it themselves. So you establish that. You say, so we've established the fault. So those who are angry and pointing the finger, they're happy because you've established that. And then you please the diplomats and say, but we do not, under no circumstance, start retaliating to innocent, good Chinese folk. It's not their fault. That is the best way to tackle it, because you please everyone. What we've got Trump that's reacting and basically common sense as a lot of the time, which is what people hate about him, in my opinion. And then you've got people that are defending China and they're attacking Trump and Boris more so than they are China. And this is when you get the balance. So then you get people that do hate on China because they think, well, China could just walk all over us. Look, our leaders aren't even defending us from them. And you just get this. This is what's wrong with the West at the moment. And it comes mostly from the left, or the globalist left, or the liberals, whatever. It's very difficult to pinpoint groups now, I'll agree. But it's from these kind of liberal sort of woke brigade. They will literally attack their own government more than China, and we don't know what's happened. But it's not beyond the realms of possibility that China has inflicted a biological attack here. We know there's been an economic war. I'm not saying this is what they've done, but we have to be open-minded to defend our lands, to defend our people. And boy, are the woke brigade miles away from that. They could be absolutely oblivious to something like that when it's going on, and that's not healthy. So I think it's another example of using common sense and diplomacy, and you don't need to be a soft little snowflake in order to do that. You can make your mark and say the truth, and also express diplomacy and common sense and decency while you're doing it. But it seems that for some reason we're really struggling to do that at the moment. I'm really getting a lot of on my chest in this show, David. It's been good speaking with you.
Yeah, I've noticed it. We make a good team over time.
Yeah, we need to do it. We need to keep doing it. It's it's reminding me how therapeutic it is.
Well, even my kid brother keeps saying, "What are you two doing?" Despite all the other projects. I mean, we've got a winning combo here over telly. Let's do it more often. Let's do it more often.
Absolutely.
Right, this is the pastor side of me coming out. We're not looking at the Black Death. We're not looking at the plague. Get a grip. And people didn't act the way back then that they're acting now. I mean, the amount of times I was tempted to be rude during the frenzy of toilet roll buying a couple of weeks ago. Who said it's going to affect your bowels? God's sake, get a grip. So at first I was posting things about, why can't we all stand together in a crisis and then get back to the squabbling? Which I still sort of think, apart from the fact that was a couple of weeks back, and the powers that be haven't felt the need to hide very questionable motivations and almost sinister intimations of what they're looking at in the future. We've got to remember that various countries in our recent European past started getting totalitarian, right, let's put our cards on the table. My cards on the table. Nazi Germany and communist Russia started getting more and more totalitarian by introducing hygiene laws. That's how it started.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know that. It's scary.
Well, I mean, yeah, that is scary. And what happened, Paul, in those days? Nobody bothered to bloody ask them, why are you doing this and what the hell is going on? So, you see why I'm worked up about this at the minute. That is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting word, fear. And that's one thing I've noticed through this. It's, excuse me, I think, I hope that's not a sign. I'm just joking, only joking. No, there's been times where friends of mine online, and friends, just generally family, people around me, it was quite ugly when you see people filling with fear. They become more stupid. They don't think clearly. They're more stressed out. They're less patient. They don't appreciate freedom as much because everyone wants to have their opinion and to be right in terms of turbulence because they've got their own little ways of dealing with things. And I think that's the big weapon, fear. I think when people, and it just seems to be, this is another thing why I'm all suspicious. Whenever people behave that way in fear, it seems to be, it's not inconceivable to think that that's a tactic used to make them that way, because they're obviously people, it's like with Brexit, it was just the fear, the bamboozling people with it in the media. Oh my God, Brexit. Now you look at it, you think big deal. Because there's something else now that it's always this fear, being hit with the fear stick. And it gets to the point you've got to think, well, maybe they want us that way because we behave in a certain way, and that's what's not good for us and stuff. So I urge people to stop being. There's never really a time. You need fear to recognise when something's wrong. Recognise that you need to act, you need to do something, but you don't need an overdose on it. You don't need to have this stress and this fear and changing and changing the way your character stuff, because I think we've seen a lot of that, especially with all this buying and toilet paper rubbish and all that. People fear. I mean, what a bunch of stupid people we look. So I'm blabbering now anyway. So carry on.
What was that boy Ian Drury? I want to be hit with a rhythm stick, not a fear stick.
Yeah.
The way they were going on in our local Iceland. God, I don't know why it's hit Italy the way it's hit Italy. That raises a lot of interesting questions. Although, of course, they have an ageing population like us, a very good health service, but run on very different principles to ours. I think that needs to be examined. What also needs to be examined is why you had super tanks on the streets. Why are they necessary? Nobody's talking about armies marching through cities. The way the West has handled it is extraordinary, and it hasn't been what governments are meant to do, which is calm people down, add reason and rational argument into public discourse, say these are the facts, this is what we do, and can we all pull together? In fact, one or two people have been burbling along those lines, but it's not been a consistent narrative. And most of the rest of the time, they're quite happy with the fear factor going off the scale. It's time to start asking why. Why is this happening? And why are people like Bill Gates now feeling free to talk about global surveillance inch by inch? Yeah. How is that going to save us from viruses? It's time. Oh, God, Ike, heavens above. I remember reading The Robots Rebellion, which I quite liked. I remember reading... Paul, what was the one with all that stuff on the front? The really big book. Was it Biggest Secret or something?
Yeah, the dot connectors, connecting the dot. What was it?
Thing. I remember thinking, well, I like some bits. I mean, he's very, very good on social unrest and that sort of thing. And he's good on
Sleeps No More. That's it.
So he's good on certain things, and sometimes you think, my God, just put a sock in it, love. But I mean, we've all got to backtrack from that position a bit after recent events. Because this is how the wrong type of globalization, if we're not careful, becomes a talking point then it becomes a protecting possibility, and then it becomes a tyranny. We've got to be really, really careful at this juncture.
Yeah, no, it's I kind of, because you can think about this and get really frustrated that people aren't waking up to it. That we can only have faith in our intelligence and see that, you know, this is wrong. And the bottom line is, we've had enough warning now. You know, we've had enough warning that there is an elite establishment, whatever you want to call them, whatever conspiracy you want to latch onto. There's an elite that have control of our finance, our education, and all this kind of stuff. And they are trying to build a global dictatorship, like a global communism. I think it's Trotsky's dream. I think it's basically a global communist state where the state owns and dictates everything, and we're just its consumers. Now, if we walk into that, then that's what we deserve. As I say, I think, you know, we've had the warnings. We can see it now, signs. Whether you believe that this is a serious virus or not, we've still got to look at the consequences, our social consequences, and the consequences towards our freedoms. You know, because you can still use a real virus pandemic for political means. It doesn't mean just everything has to happen the way it is. It's still politicians that are controlling the trajectory from this point. You know, so, you know.
When I say trial run, I mean, we have a real medical crisis on our hands. We have a serious crisis on our hands. It's the way it's being dealt with which should raise the alarm bells, give a serious wake-up call to people. It's not the fact there isn't an issue. There is, and it's a very serious medical issue, and we've got to deal with it as a society. It's the manner within which all of these regulations for our own good are being applied. That's what we've got to say. You know, hang on a second. Can we, not to stop people getting better, but we need to say, you know, hang on, why is that in place, and why have you put that there, and why are police drones buzzing my house? You know, that's what we've got to start asking. And as I say, from my point of view, we've got to start asking now, because I think things will get back to relative normality over the next couple of weeks. But what next? What next? I don't know whether it's fascist. I don't know whether it's communist. It doesn't really matter. Yes, I'm beginning to think, too, there is a global elite that really does simply want a one-world government with them at the top. I mean, Lowell on the Pew mentioned the fact a friend of his was talking to the one percenters. I've met the one percenters. Most of them are just indifferent to everybody else, and some are quite scary, some are nice. But, you know, this guy that his friend met, who was one of the one percenters, said, you know, well, we love each other and we love our animals, but we don't love you. In other words, we are the slave caste.
Yeah.
You know, and what? So, yeah, fantasy. Let's have a few moments of fantasy. If that conversation was true, and I've every belief that it did, because Lowell is a very, very good scholar and a trustworthy person. If that happened, and they think technology can actually enforce their will forever, that's exactly what David Icke was talking about 15 years ago. And we've got to start thinking, okay, now is the time to wake up a bit. It seriously is.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we start to wrap it up, I would like to touch on your point on whether it's fascist or whether it's communist. I do wonder when people call the New World Order fascist. Fascism is an extreme form of nationalism. It's authoritarian nationalism. It's basically what most nations become during a war, because they become military law, martial law, and become fascist during the process of the war. To deal with that time, and fascists that basically think we should just have that structure in place always. It's extreme nationalism. It's not globalism. Communism, Trotsky was a globalist. I suppose you could argue that Stalin, although some people would argue Stalin was perhaps a fascist, at least towards the end of his era. But for me, the New World Order, the global state, it can't be fascist because it's dogmatically anti-nationalist. It's, you know, it looks at Trump as Hitler, for Christ's sake, or Salvini, or even Nigel Farage as fascist, because anyone that shows nationalist thought is a fascist. You know, the media will absolutely beat the hell out of you. So for me, it's communist. And the only reason you get some communist nations or socialist nations that aren't really given a lot of favour by the globalists is because they are also very nationalist and very separatist and protectionist. So that doesn't go along with their plan. If you're globalist and communist, you are 100% in their sights. And that's why I did write, I think, what the hell is populism anyway, on our website, about how Trotsky communism, globalism, the global constant revolution, that to me is the new world order. But I'm sure maybe other people have got different views. Email in and let me know, other talkers that could come on and enlighten us, and some other information that proves that not to be the case. But that's what I believe it is anyway, and it's a subject we can keep touching on for sure. So yeah,
we need a show on that at some point. We need. In the meantime, I'll contact John Barnwell. I think this conversation has showed one thing very clearly. We need to get our side of this project up and running again.
Yeah.
Because you and I always manage to have a good old chin wag, and we get some interesting points going.
Well, we're obviously going to have a few time.
This is a departure point for those shows.
Yeah, we got plenty of time coming up, unless the numbers are still going up at the moment, and I'm sure my prediction end of this month, towards the end of this month, I think the numbers will start getting control, and then they'll start slowly getting back to normality. We'll have to wait and see, but it certainly looks like we're going to have more time on our hands, and both of us we should be able to do quite a bit of these shows, and it's the right time to do it, so people got stuff to listen to and in their bedrooms and while they're chilling.
Yeah, we've got a deal there. We'll get some shows on the road.
Anything you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
Well, what we do at the end of the pew is have 5 minutes, 10 minutes of shameless promotion. Yes, my new book, Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and Arts, is available on Amazon, as are my 2 earlier books of poetry, The Grammar of Witchcraft, I can't even say it, and Caliban's Redemption. I'd be deeply obliged if people would pick up a copy or give me a cup of coffee over the internet. You never know. No, that's about it, Paul. We're trying to. Oh, right. In Valentine's Hall, we're trying to get online services put into place. But as the whole world knows, I'm not the world's greatest techie, so it's taking time. But we're hoping to be able to do that by Easter weekend, because, of course, our real meetings have had to be suspended because the churches themselves have closed.
Right.
But onwards and upwards, Paul. Yeah. Onwards and upwards.
And we got to keep positive and, as I say, defend our freedom and health. As I said at the beginning of the show, everything we've said, with all this chaos, we don't know what's going on. There's not enough facts on the table for us all to. So follow the guidelines, wash your hands thoroughly, and take care of your elderly. Keep them inside, and let's follow these rules and get through the other side of it, and then start really scrutinising what's going on in the world.
Yep, I think that's it for today, my dear. It's been a great show, great talking with you again, yeah. And let's organise some shows over the next couple of weeks.
Speak soon. Thank you.
Take care now.